Tony Kinnett.
Tony Kinnett.
Tony Kinnett.
Tony Kinnett.
Tony Kinnett. Tony Kinnett.
Tony Kinnett.
Host of the Tony Kinnett Cast.
Let's get down to business.
You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Here on the Daily Signal.
Well, it's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see how it plays off for him. And by him, of course, I'm talking about Kamala Harris, Vice President of the United States, and her running mate, Tim Walz. Because it's really a bold strategy to get to the very tail end of this campaign, which has not been a lengthy one. And then, as the polls are tied, and I don't just mean like the polls are close, I mean in almost every single swing state, in some states that are likely or lean states, the polls are really close. In the swing states, the polls are not just on the same percentage point. They're on the same 1/10 of a percentage point. And not just among likely voters. Likely voter polls consist of the pollster taking what they think is going to be the likely mix of demographics and what percentage of them are going to come out for election day based on prior trends. And then they take the electoral data that they've received from their polls and they fit it into that model. That's why there are polling models. That's why, pollsters aren't all kind of basically just rated the same thing. Registered voter polls really look more at just the basic data. Just you ask 1,200 people, you organize 1,200 pieces of data. So what does this mean? Well, it means that every single thing in the next month matters. Everything, every single comment, every look, every optic. It matters because, not that it's going to sway any independent voters. I disagree. I don't think there are really any independent voters left. What you have are a lot of moderate voters. You have a lot of moderate Republicans and a lot of moderate Democrats, many of whom aren't sure if they are going to even make the effort to go stand in the DMV-style line at their local polling place and put Donald Trump and J.D. Vance or Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in the presidential slot. So it's up to the two campaigns to essentially either convince them to vote for them or against the other. And right now, Harris's strategy appears to be kind of running out the clock. And by that, I mean she's going for the next week on all friendly shows, all friendly interviews, people who've already openly endorsed her campaign. Over the weekend, she went on 60 Minutes, which, despite being a friendly interviewer, left kind of a tense moment we'll get to in a second. She went on a sex podcast called Call Me Daddy, in which, just usually a bunch of ladies who talk about sex and, kind of like Sex in the City, but somehow worse. Not even sure how that technically could be true. But Kamala Harris went on that podcast and talked about tampons and abortion, the things voters most care about. And this week, she's going on, seriously, think of the hard-hitting journalism to ask Kamala Harris about things like her response to Hurricanes Helene and now Milton, maybe the Middle Eastern situation that is rapidly devolving, perhaps the world economy, maybe about reserve currency, inflation, perhaps the industrial sector, the manufacturing sector. No. See, we've got something even better. We have The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Yeah! Exciting, no? Are you not excited? Then, The View. The View. And then, Howard Stern. Yeah, we're all excited for Howard Stern, The View, and The Late Show. Oh, thank God. I was worried that it would actually be something someone other than an airport would be watching. That's some exciting stuff. God knows everyone's tuning into Sirius XM satellite radio these days. All 15 of them. That's going to be neat. All right, that brings us to Kamala Harris in her super-duper Biden basement bargain strategy. The last month before the election, she gets slapped in her very first friendly interview. This was on 60 Minutes. She tries her standard dodging the question nonsense, the same kind of rhetoric she's always had, and doesn't get her very far. Check it out.
My plan is about saying that when you invest in small businesses, you invest in the middle class, and you strengthen America's economy. Small businesses are part of the backbone of America's economy.
But pardon me, Madam Vice President, the question was, how are you going to pay for it?
Well, one of the things is I'm going to make sure that the richest among us who can afford it pay their fair share in taxes. It is not right that teachers And nurses and firefighters are paying a higher tax rate than billionaires and the biggest corporations. And I plan on making that fair.
But we're dealing with the real world here.
But the real world includes...
How are you going to get this through Congress?
You know, when you talk quietly with a lot of folks in Congress...
Oh, when you talk quiet... Oh, hey. Well, if you actually whisper in Chuck Schumer's ear, he'll tell you the secrets of the world. And I grew up in a middle-class family. And, oh, man, just fantastic. Thank God. Thank God she's here to tell us that she grew up in a middle-class family, even though she didn't. And then to tell us how she's actually going to make the rich pay their fair share. Bernie Sanders, we need to get everyone to pay their fair percentages. It's going to be fantastic. Doesn't have a plan. And the Democrats realize this. That just looks so terrible. Then Kamala Harris decided to really do some hard-hitting campaign work and started talking about tampons on a podcast. You know, again, thousands suffering from a hurricane that ravaged Georgia and North Carolina. But here, tampons.
Daddy gang, to put it in our TikTok terms, I have seen girls on the street walk up to men and be like, do you know where a tampon goes? Do you know how many tampons we use? Do you even know do you know what a X or Y or Z is of a part of our, and they don't know the answer.
I was the first vice president or president to ever in office go to a reproductive health care clinic.
Oh my gosh, I'm the first person ever. I tampons. Great, yes. Now we've solved the problems. That's the squeaky wheel that needed the grease, ladies and gentlemen. Then she starts lying about abortion, and it's not even a good lie.
In the debate, former President Trump claimed that some states are executing babies after birth. Can you just clarify?
That is not happening anywhere in the United States.
Sources, dude, trust me, is right under that. There have been 8 cases in Minnesota in which a baby was born during an abortion and ended up basically being left to die. And it's been advocated openly for in Virginia by Democratic candidates. So, not actually false at all. That's not just me saying that. That's actually fact checkers in the actual legacy media, like the Daily Mail, reporting very openly that, Kamala's full of crap. Big shocker there. Her other strategy, amid doing all of her photo ops in bagging Ziploc bags in North Carolina and getting in the way instead of, the volunteer centers actually working for people. Kamala's running there. Let me stand in the way and bag things with you so I look important. Then she takes a quote from Tom Tillis. He's a Republican senator from North Carolina. And he said, the last thing the victims of Helene need right now is political posturing, finger pointing, or conspiracy theories that only hurt the response effort. And so the Kamala Harris campaign took this and then said, hey, did a little elbow jock, Donald Trump on social media. And then Tom Tillis actually responded and said, excuse me, Vice President Harris, I was talking about politicians like you using this for political posturing, claiming to be working around the clock while you don't even plug your headphones in for a staged photo op. And he also lists basically a couple of other surrounding incidents in which Kamala Harris has been doing this fun media tour and fundraisers. She hasn't been down there on the ground, working hard for the people. Get out of here. You're not fooling anybody. And this is dangerous for a couple of reasons. First of all, the country is kind of aware that the federal government is not really looking too good in this particular disaster recovery situation. Here are some clips taken over the weekend from some of the survivors of Helene in North Carolina.
People have lost everything. There's nothing here.
We're 9 days post-hurricane, and that was the first FEMA drop I've seen here in the Swannanoa area. I haven't seen a FEMA agent yet. This is all local volunteers from abroad, as far as Washington State.
So it's just not going well. Then we get to the Trump side of things. So Trump went back to Butler, Pennsylvania, where he was shot the first time. By the way, I did want to mention that according to a New York Post article, an FBI agent early on was basically trying to tell Trump assassination witnesses that Trump wasn't actually shot. He actually hit his head on the podium. Despite video from several angles showing that not even to be remotely true, the FBI is already screwing things up. That's just a fun fact. But anywho, so Trump went back. And we got to see, and I mean this apolitically, because for a president or a former president or a presidential candidate to survive an assassination attempt is cool enough. For them to stand up and shout, fight, fight, fight with the American flag in the background, that's awesome. I don't care who you are. For Trump to go back and then tell the crowd, after honoring the fallen firefighter Corey Compratore, who was shot by one of the bullets that was intended for Trump, that Trump started right where he left off when the shots rang out, by starting with, as I was saying, and I kid you not, guys, it is one of the greatest on-stage moments in American political history. Check this out.
As I was saying,
I don't care who you are, that's cool. That's cool. It was a good rally. And since then, by the way, Trump has been, again, giving very focused, detailed, specific plans. He's been taking questions from the press, and he has been appealing, along with J.D. Vance, to voters in the swing states. While someone is, kind of running around doing her little friendly buddy media tour. And I want to make this clear. I made this point on National Report this morning. If Trump spent the next month going around only just day after day, he did a Newsmax interview one day, and then he did a Fox News interview, and then he did a Daily Wire interview, and then he did a Daily Caller interview, and then he did an interview with us, and he just did just all conservative-leaning outlets, we would say, what are you doing this for? We're already likely to be voting for you if we have conservative in front of our name. But this is Harris's plan on the other side. Not necessarily a great thing. Finally, this brings us to Karine Jean-Pierre, who, remember all the times over the last couple of months that she's told us that she doesn't have certain amounts of information from the White House? Well, they're fixing that, folks, because Karine Jean-Pierre has just been promoted to senior advisor for the president. And that brings us to a disastrous press conference today we'll talk about next. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated. We'll be right back.
Before I got jacked, I was on the same track. Back up.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIPC.
Well, let me tell you, as we continue on through just one of the weirdest Octobers before an election season, we have to consider that a lot of the political nonsense that's going on right now doesn't matter. And first of all, I cannot say how encouraging it is to see friends and family members from my community, from all different kinds of communities who are dropping everything to go help North Carolina, to help rural Georgia, to help Florida. God knows that Florida is going to need some help given the path expected for Hurricane Milton, which is now a Category 5 storm, becoming one of the strongest hurricanes ever recorded, maximum sustained winds of 180 miles per hour. And there's a lot to dig into. There are a lot of people that suggest that you just shouldn't talk about anything related to the federal government in the middle of a storm or a tragedy. They say, well, that's politicizing it. I don't think so. I think that it's important that individuals who claim responsibility for taking care of needs before the storm are held to accountability after the storm. Because as a society, as a republic, we elect individuals to take care of certain things that are out of the control, that are out of the measure of response for perhaps the community or even a single state. That one of the ideas of federalism is that there are some very few tasks that are allotted indeed to the federal government. One of those being what is supposed to be the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is supposed to put the entire section of resources of the United States federal government under a single Department of Homeland Security apparatus to coordinate and, you guessed it, manage all of the moving parts so that it is done smoothly. For those of you who are project managers or project leads or whatever nonsensical title we're coming up with, we're just like manager these days. This is the top of the game, all right? These are the individuals who should be the best at coordinating and communicating in the entire country. And that's just not the case. So we're going to talk about a few of the truths and the falses, because right now, everybody's pointing at each other and shouting disinformation. We're going to get one thing out of the way really quickly, just because it's such a non-issue and there are so many more important things to focus on right now. This is eating up too much airtime as it is. Those of you who have suggested, or those of individuals out there who have suggested that actually the hurricanes are created by the federal government and this is actually HARP and it's a CIA mechanism that they're using to destroy red area, stop it. That's not how that works. That is not at all how weather works. That's not at all how weather manipulation works either. And the answer the response is often cited, well, the government investigated it in the later half of the 20th century. Yes, and do you know what it was the U.S. federal government found? That even when seeding clouds, it works like 1 out of 30 times. It is an extremely low probability it will do anything, and we cannot control wind patterns. We cannot. You can't heat a large portion of an atmosphere and drive a storm in one direction. We cannot do it. We've tried, we can't. Now, over in like Dubai and places where they do try to do an aggressive amount of cloud seeding to cause rainstorms in areas, they have completely goofed that up too. They can't even control how much rain falls in the area. So stop it. And I say that kindly. I know it's easy in an era where the federal government has done a lot of kind of gross things, especially regarding COVID-19, to just, conspiracy theorists have been proven right on a couple of things. So why not this one? Because believe me, during the Trump administration, if this was something we could do, it would have been talked about. The idea that there have been a lot of administrations in which everyone is just keeping things under wrap. The United States has the security apparatus in the federal government of a Ziploc bag that is riddled with holes. Pour water in, stuff's going to leak out. Now, all right, so moving on from that, let's get into the stuff where the federal government is guilty. In this case, it is weaponized incompetence. It is the absolute stupidity of the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the entire Department of Homeland Security's leadership, who wasted huge chunks of the United States budget and huge chunks of the FEMA budget on things like migrant resettlement, which is explicitly stated on their website. We've already talked about it. But anyway, Kamala Harris came out today because she knows everything. and tried to tell everyone this is a bunch of misinformation and disinformation. Okay.
So please do that. The other point I'd make is that there's a lot of mis and disinformation being pushed out there by the former president about what is available, in particular to the survivors of Helene. And first of all, it's extraordinarily irresponsible. It's about him. It's not about you. And the reality is that FEMA...
Did you catch that? She's talking about Trump. It's about him. It's not about you. Ma'am, you were at fundraisers and fun media interviews all weekend, and you're going to lecture us on how Donald Trump's been making the hurricane about himself? Not sure that'll fly. Karine Jean-Pierre just had a full-on fight with Peter Doocy today, and it resulted in her storming out of the room, and it was something. It was really something else. And we don't have time to dig into the whole clip. We'll try to chop it up and play a little of it later. But Karine Jean-Pierre, again, tried to allege that, no, guys, FEMA's not spending huge portions of its budget on illegal immigrants. And Peter Doocy said, well, how about these receipts in which we show, again, the settler and housing assistance programs in which FEMA is settling and paying for the housing of illegal immigrants. And all people are getting in North Carolina who are survivors of the hurricane was $750. And Karine Jean-Pierre eventually got so aggravated that she actually walked out of the room, and it was quite astonishing.
On this issue of funding, the administration has money to send to Lebanon without Congress coming back. But Congress does have to come back to approve money to send to people in North Carolina. Do I have that right?
Here's what I'm going to be very clear about. The president and the vice president has had a robust whole of government response to this. To help survivors of Hurricane Helene and also Hurricane Milton. Now there's going to be a shortfall, right? Because we don't know how bad Hurricane Milton is going to be. And so we're going to need additional funding. That's
exactly what I just asked about. And you said it was misinformation. Yes.
What you're asking me is why Congress needs to come back and do their job. That's what you're asking me. Congress needs to come back and do their job and provide extra assistance, extra funding to disaster relief fund. That's what Congress needs to do, and we're going to continue to urge that. You may not want that, but that's okay. That's what this president wants, and that's what the vice president wants.
He got under her skin. She ran out. She's like, that was mean. You Peter Doocy getting all... Also, I just want to point out, look, I usually don't get into things like this, but I would be so remiss if I didn't mention that she is wearing a pink button-up shirt without a tie. It's buttoned all the way up to the top, which is a no-no. If you don't have a tie, don't button the top button of your collared shirt. Basic rules of how to dress. Number two, she's wearing a gray pinstripe jacket over the pink shirt. She looks like a child's image of if Willy Wonka was a Rockefeller. I don't know what on earth, who's dressing her, but don't. Stop that. A Metallica t-shirt would have been more professional than Mr. Monopoly's goofy cousin. Okay. All right. So moving on from that, I do want to point out very clearly that, Alejandro Mayorkas did brag about how FEMA was totally prepared for disaster relief. And then again came out and said, actually, we have no money at all now.
FEMA is tremendously prepared. This is what we do. This is what they do. And the key here, Rebecca, is also to make sure that the communities who are potentially impacted are prepared as well. And it's not just hurricanes and wildfires, also extreme heat, which certainly some parts of the United States are already experiencing.
Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas sounding the alarm on FEMA funding right after the devastation of Hurricane Helene. Listen.
We are meeting the immediate needs with the money that we have. We are expecting another hurricane hitting. We do not have the funds. FEMA does not have the funds to make it through the season.
There you go. I mean, amazing. Where does it all go? Well, then Kamala Harris gets up on X, which is a very bad decision. Again, it is not good for her right now in the public eye. So what she decides to do, or her intern decides to do, is make it worse. She says, the people of Lebanon are facing an increasingly dire humanitarian situation. And she says she's concerned about the security and the well-being of civilians suffering in Lebanon. Huh. He said, to that end, the United States will provide nearly $157 million in additional assistance to the people of Lebanon for essential needs such as food, shelter, water protection, and sanitation to help those who have been displaced by the recent conflict. Now, the left is already jumping down the throats of those who are saying, this is kind of disgusting that we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on humanitarian aid for other countries when we're having humanitarian crises. And although Kamala did get roasted in the replies of that tweet, I don't think I've ever seen a vice president or a president get ratioed that hard on social media. I do want to point something out. You guys do know that the president of the United States can declare a humanitarian crisis here in the country. It's been done 27 times in our nation's history. 27. With a snap of his fingers, if he had the ability to, or with a click of her jowls, Kamala Harris or Joe Biden could strut forward and declare a humanitarian crisis and spend humanitarian foreign aid money in the United States. That is legally allowed. That has been done before. Well, Congress needs to come in and pass money. They want to do that so they can stuff something like an abortion regulation or some other kind of poison junk in the bill. And then when Republicans vote against it, they'll say, see, Republicans are really big and bad, and they won't spend money on hurricane relief victims. But because there's something in the bill that's like, also, we're going to kill all dogs, Republicans say, no, I'm not going to vote for that, because that's how bills work in Congress. There's one good thing and there's 800 bad things. And if you vote against the bad things, the media reports, you're actually against the good thing in the bill. Fantastic. Well, because the news never ends, it has now been 1 year since Iran decided to mess around and find out. We're going to dig into it. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated. Be back in just a second.
You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Good evening. Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated, first out of 93 WIBC in Indianapolis. So the Within Our Lifetime group, which is a supposedly a pro-Palestinian people, not an anti-Israel, not a pro-Hamas group, pro-Palestine people activist group, decided to hold a big, huge rally today in New York City. Now, what's the significance of today? Well, 1 year ago today was the rape, slaughter, burning, raping, just horrible, horrible stuff that occurred to over 1,200 Israeli civilians, and the hostage taking that also included American citizens taken hostage, as well as from several other nations. Now, since then, and we'll get into this in just a second, since then, there really has been an element of, mess around and find out that Hamas, the Iranian terrorist proxy, and Hezbollah, the Iranian terrorist proxy, and the Houthis, the Iranian terrorist proxy, and Iran itself have actually found out. But we're going to talk about this first. Over the last year, the far progressive left has embraced the pro-Hamas movement so hard. And by the way, when I say the pro-Hamas movement, I mean when I have been at their rallies. When I was in Chicago for the Democratic National Convention, in the crowd, in fact, the front of the crowd of these particular rallies, some of the flags present were indeed the green Hamas flag with white text. And I don't mean the flag of Saudi Arabia. I mean the green flag of Hamas, the organization, not the flag of Palestine. And many other gross, disgusting, not anti-Israel, but anti-Jew flags and anti-Christian flags. Because who's done a lot of raping and murdering of Jews and Christians? Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed terror organization in southern Lebanon, which since 2006, the United Nations has ruled is not allowed to occupy southern Lebanon at all. In fact, the UN is supposed to have a garrison there, keeping them out, but the UN garrison does nothing. In fact, I'm pretty sure the UN, any garrison from the United Nations, has spent more time witnessing genocides and doing nothing than Rosie O'Donnell has spent being obese. Just to, just kind of put things in perspective here. The UN is a waste of money. We should cut it out. We should get out of it. Stop funding it. It is doing nothing but perpetuating the slaughter of innocent men, women, and children around the world, including Sunni Muslims, Christians, both Coptic and non-denominational. If you want to get really specific, also a lot of Eastern Orthodoxy Christians, as well as, of course, Jewish people from Eastern Europe all the way through the Middle East. That's the kind of stuff the UN has stood idly by and maybe clucked their tongues out every once in a while. The real problem, that's those white Westerners. Oh, so terrible. Colonialism. Ooh, anger, angst. And that's led to a lot of protests, rallies, and riots on American college campuses, in which we witnessed individuals that were basically vandalizing, stealing, committing mass acts of violence, getting into a little bit of a shooting around the globe every once in a while. Disgusting acts of the most horrid filth that members of our own United States Congress would not dare to possibly it's because of those Jews. And Kamala Harris understands that if she doesn't flirt with those people, then she doesn't win Michigan. So on 60 Minutes over the weekend, again, right before October 7th, the interviewer asks about Benjamin Netanyahu. And Kamala Harris, because she's a coward and she knows that she can't actually offend the Shia Muslims in Michigan, not the Sunni Muslims, but the Shia Muslims, the fundamentalists in Michigan, gives the weirdest non-answer I have seen in a very long time. Check it out.
Do we have a real close ally in Prime Minister Netanyahu?
I think, with all due respect, the better question is, do we have an important alliance between the American people and the Israeli people? And the answer to that question is yes.
Hey, do you think that, it's important that... do you think it's maybe kind of important that this individual remains the president of this company? I think the important thing everyone needs to know is that I really enjoy Subway sandwiches. Yes, that's an answer. Thank you very much, Kamala Harris. Very astute as always. She's a coward. And it's really not going to work because, again, we see consistently more and more Jewish voters are trending in favor of Trump. Because when Trump was in power, once again, setting the stage, the world was at relative peace. Relative meaning there's never been a point in human history in which the entire world was sitting around a campfire and singing Kumbaya, no matter what the Woodstock rallies will tell you. But I think it's important that everyone keeps into consideration the difference between now and 5 years ago. Because 5 years ago, Russia wasn't in Ukraine, Iran would not have dared attack Israel, and the Abraham Accords were set up. Now, Israel has spent the last year taking out Hamas, destroying Hezbollah to the point that the guy that was supposed to be the next leader of the terrorist organization got on camera sweating great drops, like we're talking Gatorade commercial levels of sweat, started blubbering and crying on camera and said he wouldn't take the job because Israel's assassinated the entire leadership structure of this terror organization. And then the Houthis as well are in the middle of finding out. Now, the United States, by the way, just to make this clear, here's my position for foreign policy on Yemen. Kill every last member of the Houthis and then carve Yemen in half and just take half of Yemen. For the United States. Call it a trading outpost. There's no reason that if Yemen can't control that half of the country, they don't deserve it. Shipping in the Red Sea is extremely important to the United States economy, therefore it's extremely important to the United States citizen. I'm tired of the Houthis, carpet bomb it, and take it. Is the president of Yemen going to get upset? Oh, no! Oh, shucks! Whenever the United States became the kind of bow and lick the feet of our enemies as a country, kind of a nation, when the liberals really took a hold of foreign policy guilt tripping from the mid to late 60s onward, there's going to be collateral damage. Yeah, it's called war. You do what you can to eliminate as much collateral damage as possible, and then you win the war. Just because the aggressor hides behind civilians doesn't mean the aggressor gets to walk away free. And Biden's suggesting sanctions or, well, Israel, if you don't strike Iran's nuclear facilities, then we'll help you out, like he said over the weekend in his military suggestion to the Israelis. Nonsense. By the way, Iran currently has explosions happening near a suspected nuclear facility. So there actually might be an anniversary present after the 2 ballistic missile barrages from Iran towards civilian population centers that actually might be coming towards Iran in strictly military and economic targets. So we'll probably have more news on that for tomorrow. I'm not going to speculate any more than is necessary. We'll be back in just a second because it's time for a few closing thoughts on just how is running out the clock on a tie going to go. I would say your guess is as good as mine, but I've got a few data points I think you're going to like. Stick around. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated, and first on 93 WIBC.
To protect his family from disaster, Steve used his...
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Well, it's good to be with you this October 7th, Monday evening. Here from Indiana, though we're broadcasting around the country in several of our syndication partners, states, all the way from Arkansas over to Colorado to Florida, up to Eastern Ohio. So when you take a look at the weird strategy of running out the clock on a tie, the idea of Kamala Harris getting out there and saying anything else off script, having another teleprompter moment in which she stares at the screen for 30 seconds, repeating 32 over and over like she did when she was in Michigan, or again, having, even in friendly interviews, really awkward moments where she can't answer questions, that hurts her. Because you run the risk of someone basically reaching their boiling point with like, all right, I'm done with this. I'm not going out to vote. And that is the real danger to Harris, is that if Harris says anything at this point that rubs someone the wrong way, it could cost the election. And I mean like 90s Labor Democrats. MSNBC hosts and analysts everywhere are pointing out that Kamala Harris has lost men consistently. Like guys above the age of 30 cannot stand her at all. Guys under the age of 30 can't stand her either. They're just less likely to vote. So where does that actually put the country? Well, here's the good news. According to the Real Clear Politics polling averages in the top battleground states right now, Trump is up on Harris by 0.1%. Now you may say, Tony, that's like not really good news. After all, that's basically a tie. That's within the margin of error. That's not great at all. And doesn't Harris lead by a point in Nevada? 0.8 in Wisconsin, 0.7 in Michigan. Heck, Pennsylvania's a tie, you might say, in angst and fear. I'm going to remind you guys of something very clearly. In U.S. presidential elections, in normal years when there is not a pandemic raging, and even when there is a pandemic raging, Republicans almost always, and by almost always, I am assuming there is going to be a case in modern polling in which I have like 1 or 2 states wrong. But the vast majority of polls in the modern era of the information style polling that we have, basically since modern VoIP and internet access, 2 things are very true. Number 1, men are much less likely to answer polls. They are. Working men in the trades are much less likely to answer polls. Most often, text messages, emails, phone calls by men are ignored. Women are much more likely to answer the phone, an email, a text. That means that kind of a little bit unreliable here. Number 2, I would like to remind everyone, and this is the whole, since we've begun modern polling, Republicans have always overperformed polling data. Always overperformed. If Trump overperforms in any one of these situations, consistent with Trump versus Biden in 2020, Trump versus Hillary Clinton in 2016, Mitt Romney Obama in 2012, John McCain Obama in 2008, John Kerry and George Bush in 2004, even Bush Gore in the aught. If Trump performs like any of those Republican candidates, including himself, on election day, based on what the national polling was at this time, he walks away 10 points up in every single poll, except for Pennsylvania. He gets about a 5-point boost if you look at 2020 Biden, 2020 Trump in Pennsylvania. 5 points better. So what does that mean? That means that right now, the running out the clock on a tie, it's not a tie. It's not a tie. Now, does this mean that Trump's going to win? No, I would be an idiot to look at you right now and say, guys, Trump has this in the bag. It's all over. Yay. No. I told you guys that the best thing after we got back from the Republican National Convention, and I spent a little while up in Milwaukee going through 800 Secret Service agent lines and state police lines, was that Republicans were not like Hillary Clinton in 2016, who thought there's no way they could lose this. And so they kicked back in the last month of the election. Hillary Clinton didn't visit Wisconsin, and it cost her the election. Trump did not win 2016 as much as Hillary lost it because she just kind of gave up. Thought, oh, it's no problem. Classic case of tortoise in the hare. Kamala Harris is kind of running out the clock here, which is, again, wild because even she has admitted that in polling right now, she claims to be the underdog. Well, she's not the underdog positionally. She's the sitting vice president of the United States. She says she's the underdog because people do not like her. And if any metric of polling at all holds up based on historical trends. Any metric at all. I like Nate Silver. I like Scott Rasmussen. I like a lot of the pollsters. I think their analytics are very interesting. Producer Daniel is far more into the derivatives and all of the algorithmic implications than I am. But although I like a lot of them and I respect their opinion, I'm sorry, but the idea that all of the polls are dead accurate is silly. If Republicans actually do come out and either cast early voting, I'm going to go vote early next week for Indiana. And if a lot of individuals on the right side of the aisle or the 90s Labor Democrat side of the aisle, as we've seen with the Teamsters, come out and vote for Trump, Harris is in, forget deep water, forget hot water. She's like neck deep in plasma. It's not looking good. Running out the clock on a tie, it ain't a tie. Just ain't. We'll be back tomorrow with a little bit more on maybe some foreign policy news. Stick around for tomorrow. We'll see you then. This has been the Tony Kinnett Cast on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first out of 93 WIBC, Indianapolis.